All right, I guess we should get started. I just want to say off the outset, that is the best ASMR, like little video intro that I have seen on one of these webinars in 4.5 years. So Kate and the folks at RPA, congratulations. And please share that out to everybody because if you ever have problems getting to sleep at night, a little bit of that ASMR definitely works. I am Michael Romita. I'm the president and CEO at the Westchester County Association. Thank you all for tuning in today to hear about this new report called Building Growth on the economic impacts of addressing the housing crisis here in Westchester and the Hudson Valley. We have over 150 people who have registered and well over 100 who have already tuned in at the beginning of this. And for all of us who sit through a lot of these video presentations and webinars, that's an outstanding number of people signing on. A couple of shout outs, people who have registered who have already tuned in, folks representing our U.S. congressmen, our U.S. senators, folks from the county, from state government, local government, and the county. So thank you to all of you. So the purpose of today's webinar is to talk about the economic impacts of building housing here in Westchester and the Hudson Valley. Local governments continue to struggle with this issue and trying to address both housing costs and the housing shortages. And we decided at the Westchester County Association to call our friends at the Regional Plan Association to partner and actually provide something a little bit unique and different. And that's providing facts and data to what can often be a very politically charged conversation. So the discussion is going to focus on presenting these facts and data. We will also try and address certain data gaps that are not contained in the report. And for that, we've asked Chance Mullen to join us. I will introduce both of our panelists in a couple of minutes. So a little bit about Welcome Home Westchester. Chance and Kate and I are all on the steering committee for the Welcome Home Westchester campaign. That is a multi-stakeholder advocacy effort consisting of businesses, nonprofit leaders, academics, think tanks, anti-homeless advocates, climate activists, faith leaders, and community activists, all working together to drive a new public conversation around fixing the housing shortage here in Westchester County. In addition to the three of us, some other folks who've tuned in today are other people who help steer the Welcome Home Westchester campaign, including Jan Fisher at Nonprofit Westchester, John Cooney at the Construction Industry Council, and Tim Foley at the BRI. Now, about our participants. It's great to have Kate and Chance with us. Kate is the Executive Vice President of the Regional Plan Association. She has worked on some of the most important policies in the tri-state, focusing on equitable economic growth and environmental resiliency, and has vast experience in both the state and local level of government. She is widely published and often cited in publications such as the New York Times and The Economist. Chance is the executive director of the Housing Action Council, a role he took over just a couple of months ago. Congratulations, Chance. And he leads the organization's efforts to expand and preserve affordable housing opportunities across the Hudson Valley. Chance formerly spent over a decade at the Ford Foundation, where he forged international partnerships focused on leadership development and change management. He is also the vice president of the Westchester Municipal Officials Association and the mayor of the village of Pelham, my hometown. Go Pelicans. So with that, I think we'd like to start with Kate, but before we do, some ground rules. We will try and do a curated Q&A after Kate and Chance have had an opportunity to present out their data. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat box. I will do my best to filter through them and ask the most important ones. Not that your questions are not important. If I don't get to them, it'll just be a time issue because we don't want to run over today. We are filming and we are taping this, and we will make this film and taping available to everybody who's tuned in after the presentation is over. So hopefully we can get to your questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about the Building Growth Report. Thank you all for tuning in, and Kate, it's over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. It's great to be here, and it's been a wonderful partnership with Welcome Home Westchester and with Westchester County Association working on this report. So I'm pleased to run through it today. So thanks for having me, and what great attendance. And today is my 19th wedding anniversary, so I hope we end at 5 so I can actually get home and see my husband this evening. So it's great to be here. Um, Next slide, please. Great. In case you don't know who Regional Plan Association is, we're a nonprofit research planning and advocacy organization. Some of that was highlighted in the lovely intro that our communications team has put together here. And we're dedicated to improving the New York City metropolitan region's environmental health and economic health, environmental sustainability, and quality of life. And we really focus in on housing, transportation and mobility, and environmental resiliency. Next slide, please. This is the region we cover, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, if not all of you, with Westchester County right in the middle there. We cover 3 states, 31 counties, 782 municipalities. I know we'll be talking a little bit about local control and home rule in this session today. And it's a region of 23 million residents. And we really share a labor market, we share housing, we share transportation, and we're really interconnected, even though there are so many different political jurisdictions here. And RPA has really been raising the alarm about some of the long-term challenges in our region. We've been around for over 100 years, and we've been doing it for that long. But over the past decade or so, we've really focused in on housing because it is really one of the fundamental challenges of most of everyone who lives in our region, and really one of the long-term threats to our future as a metropolitan area and a global leader. So today I'll be reviewing some of the work we did with Welcome Home Westchester and in partnership with the Westchester County Association in partnership with Welcome Home Westchester. And I'm here presenting today, but really the smarter colleagues of mine, Moses Gates, who's our VP of Housing and Neighborhood Planning, and Marcel Negret, who's our Director of Land Use, are the brains behind this report and really the ones who put it together. So if you have any follow-up questions about methodology or things like that, I'll refer you to them. Next slide, please. So our report really looks at how much housing has been built in Westchester and what the needs are and what the effect is of not meeting those needs in the future. So this slide looks at the last 2 development cycles in Westchester County, basically since 1990. And what you'll see here is that 61,000 units have been built, so 61,000 homes. And the first development cycle, which we considered between 1990 and 2009, there were about 34,000 homes built. And then from 2010 to 2024, there is 27,000 homes built. And I think the key finding here is that the lighter colors are smaller units. So the yellow is only like a single family home. And the darker colors here in this slide are higher density, 3 to 4 units in a building or 5 or more units in a building. And so what you can see here is there's really been a shift towards multifamily housing and multifamily buildings over the past decade or so, especially. And the share of multifamily buildings has grown substantially, and it was 78% of the total housing stock permitted between 2010 and 2024, compared to only 29% during the pre-Great Recession cycle. So that's a significant shift. And for those of us who really care about smart growth planning and transit-oriented development, that housing has really moved in that direction. It's been built around transit stations, along main streets, and really focused in a few municipalities. And I'm guessing many people on the call who can guess some of them, places like New Rochelle, White Plains, and Yonkers. Next slide, please. But in spite of this growth, vacancy rates in housing have declined and remain incredibly low. They're around 1.9% here for renters now. which really indicates an insufficient supply of homes to meet the demand that's out there. A healthy vacancy rate is between 5 and 8%. So once you dip below 2%, it means the rents go up, housing prices really grow, and everything becomes increasingly unaffordable for everyone. So now almost half of renters in Westchester County remain cost burdened due to these high housing costs. Next slide, please. The shortage of homes in Westchester and across the region really affects people. It affects our family budgets. It affects community well-being. And it affects mental health. And I don't think we talk enough about the mental health challenges of not only being homeless or something like that, but really having a financial strain, even if you're in a home, of having to pay the bills every month. And it also affects our environment. If you live farther from your place of work, farther from where your family is, you have to travel more, and that drives up our greenhouse gas emissions. So these are things we talk about all the time at RPA. For the purposes of this report, we really looked at the economic effects of the broader economy in Westchester and the entire region if we don't build the homes we need. Next slide, please. So to understand the economic impacts of our housing needs, RPA researchers outlined 4 different scenarios. So the first 2 project out a few scenarios and how much housing could be built based on what has happened already, things that we already have in place. The first is business as usual. So this essentially assumes that housing is built over the next 15 years at a rate that it has been over the past 15 years. So about a 0.6% growth rate per year. The second scenario we looked at assumes a 1% growth rate every year in housing stock. So what is essentially outlined in New York State's Pro Housing Communities program. And then we looked at potential housing need, and this is 3 and 4 on the slide here. So 2 options. One, we looked at a low growth scenario where job growth doesn't grow as fast as it might otherwise. And that is about, 0.25% per year on average is what we looked at. And then we looked at a high growth scenario, and it assumes that the housing needs are fully met under a high job growth scenario, which is closer to 2% of job growth per year. So you can go to the next slide. So this is what we projected out. So you see here the red or orange, depending, I'm not sure exactly what color it is, I think it's orange, is the high need scenario. The low need is the yellow. The purple is the pro housing scenario, so that's a 1% growth per year. And the blue is business as usual. And so I think the big takeaway here is that if we proceed with business as usual, we're going to have a big gap in the housing needs, even if it's a low growth in jobs and we see sort of a low economic growth over the next several years. And if we look at a sort of aspirational growth rate where you have high economic growth and high job growth, then the housing gap could be as much as 77,000 units between now and by the time we get to 2040. So essentially it means we need more homes, we need to build more homes, and I think that's a key finding of this report. Next slide, please. Not providing enough homes for people has a serious economic impact, and we quantified that in this report. So over the next 15 years, if Westchester's housing gap is not addressed, it will cost the county between 8,400 and 12,000 annual jobs. So that's approximately 530 to 740 million in earnings annually, and a staggering 32 to 57 billion in GDP growth. So this includes direct jobs, so jobs from actual construction of housing, indirect jobs, and jobs induced by new housing. So if someone's living in a home, for example, the job that's created and the local business that benefits from a coffee shop down the street or a local retailer or something like that. Next slide, please. And this slide just looks a little bit closer at where the jobs would come from each type of housing under our study. So really you see that multifamily building types create the most jobs in our scenarios, around 12,500 of 17,000 annual jobs. Next slide, please. And it's similar also for the earnings that people could receive potentially from the housing being constructed, right? So that's about 775 million could come from the multifamily construction, so the higher density housing.
Hey, Kate, I think you have a couple of slides on this, but one of the questions that's already been asked is something that you and I talked about when we were putting this report together. Um, the assumptions that the RPA used to come up with the housing needs. Um, how did you guys kind of ideate around that? Because we've often seen, for instance, the housing needs assessment from 2019 talked about a need for 12,000 new housing starts.
Yep.
And the numbers that RPA came out with projecting forward are significantly higher than that. So
Yeah.
how did you guys come up with the numbers? What were the underlying assumptions?
Yeah, so we looked at a lot of different things. I mean, we've done a series of reports sort of about housing growth, but I'll get to this at the end. But it's not only the need that we have now, but it also includes potential household formation. It includes existing overcrowding in homes, and it also includes potential homes that could be lost to flooding due to climate change. So there's a bunch of different things that we also brought into this analysis. And we use federal data. And again, Marcel and Moses can help you like work through the methodology if anyone on the call is interested in that, my colleagues here at RPA. But we use federal data, we use census data, we use federal economic data, and we use some data from some work we've done in the past with McKinsey and some of our own internal analysis as well.
And one of the other things we talked about was it's an imprecise methodology, obviously. So
Yeah,
you've got to provide a range.
yeah.
But even the low end of the range was slightly above a pro-housing community's aspirational kind of target of 1% annual growth per year.
Yeah, yeah. If we go to the next slide, it sort of details it a little bit more, I think, and you'll be able to see some of the things we looked at. And just skip this one, the next one. Yeah. So here you see some of the things we looked at, and this is the low growth projection, right? So where job growth isn't as high as it would be in another scenario. And so you see the current need here that has been projected is about, it's 21,000. And then we're saying the prospective need under the low growth scenario is upwards of, it could be as high as 79,000. And here you can see, where the prospective need comes from. Dilapidated housing, potential flood loss, and then household formation, right? So new people, new families needing homes. And
So
then
you had these slides at the beginning that talked about the current trajectory and also housing starts over the last 15 years and then going back for 30 years. And there was a cycle. So, we've done quite a bit over the last 10 years, but the county is playing catch up. Then you had a slide that showed, what the vacancy rates were, and it was well below 2%.
yeah,
What's healthy? What's a healthy vacancy rate?
yeah, it's between 5 and 8% is a healthy vacancy rate. Yeah. So I think I have one more slide and then I'm going to pass it back to you, Michael, or two more slides maybe. So we went through the next slide, which is sort of the high growth, right? This is what Michael and I were just talking about with the prospective need and some of the factors we considered when looking at that need. So this sort of shows that it could be over 100,000 units needed by 24 if you're looking at a high job growth scenario. And then I think there's two more slides. So next slide. So, right. So this sort of looks at the investment and development that we would need to put in to create the housing. And there's going to need to be investment from the private sector, from the public sector, all of that to sort of get to where we need to go. Next slide. Great. So a couple final thoughts and just a reminder of kind of the key core finding of this report. Failing to meet the housing demand in Westchester could cost the county up to, 57 billion in economic activity, 12,000 jobs annually, and over 700 million in annual earnings. And just to talk sort of more globally about some of this stuff, there's been some recent trends in fast growing towns in Westchester that have defeated some of the concerns that people have had traditionally about building new homes. And that is specifically around new school enrollment. We haven't seen it in a lot of communities that have actually allowed new homes to come in, and there's a number of reasons for that we can get into if you want. There's been a number of national studies on infrastructure that's showing that efficiencies are gained when towns, cities, and metro areas build in more compact patterns. So that's great news for Westchester. It's already doing it, just needs to do more of it. And there's now actual evidence and data that shows places in our region and across the country that have loosened their zoning regulations and actually built more housing have helped reduce rent increases. So the benefits go to the community as a whole, not just the people living in the new homes. And we actually have data here at RPA that looks at New Jersey municipalities compared to Long Island. New Jersey, has generally allowed more homes to be built. There's a lot of reasons for that, having to do with state regulations. Long Island, not as much. And you've seen the growth in rents go up much faster on Long Island, where there's been less housing produced than they have in Jersey, where they sort of stabilized it a little bit. And then there's one final slide about what everyone on the call can do. Great. So get engaged locally. I mean, really across the country, when we've seen places address their housing crisis, it's been because volunteers and residents have gotten engaged and started talking about these issues, understanding these issues. There's been a lot of negativity around new housing and sort of loosening zoning codes. And so you got to sort of beat that, and balance it out and understand the history of these issues, the data, and really understand some of the nuances in the discussions and be able to communicate about them effectively. Welcome Home Westchester has a number of recommendations for what towns and municipalities in Westchester can do. Create housing action plans, legalize accessory dwelling units or ADUs. These are basement apartments or garage apartments, or allow two-family conversions. So a single-family home being converted into a home for two families. Encourage housing near transit. Fast track certain projects that meet goals like environmental goals or affordable housing goals, and really educate yourself about the history and your town planners, and ask state leaders for change. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Kate. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. And we have a couple of questions that I can message out. One in particular creates a nice segue into what Chance is going to show us. And one of the people who've tuned in have asked specifically, well, if we build more housing, essentially, what does that do to home values? And I think that the premise there is, if there's more supply, that it's going to potentially erode the value of single family homes, and then, the kind of equity that people have tied up in their homes. For the most part, the kind of housing that's been built, and I'll ask you to comment on this too, Kate, but from my perspective, for the most part, the kind of housing that's been constructed in Westchester over the last couple of cycles has mostly been multifamily, not single family. It's been rental. So you're talking about the kinds of dwellings that are attractive to a different subset of the market than somebody who would be buying a single family home here in Westchester, which seems to be, very high priced regardless. And more importantly, think of what that does to your local taxes. So if you don't have more residents coming into the community, if you have workers that are leaving the community, creating a vicious cycle where our businesses follow because they can't find workers to live locally, and people basically can't afford to live here in Westchester. Well, our municipalities, our towns and villages, they still have to pay for municipal services. Somebody has to finance that, and it becomes an even bigger burden on the single family home dweller. That's my 2 cents, Kate, but you may have some other thoughts as well.
No, I mean those are all great points, and I'll say, there's a limit here, right? I mean, I've lived in this region for 20 plus years, and I have bought houses to what, well, I bought an apartment and a house, and each time I did that, I would not be able to afford that apartment 5 years later or that place 5 years later because the housing prices have so substantially moved past the income growth, right? And that's me as a married, have a lot of privilege that a lot of other people don't. So I think there's a limit to how much we actually want our housing costs to go up and how fast. And I think there's also a really good point that you brought up, Michael, about the balance, right? We have an oversupply of single family homes. A lot of people cannot afford or not able to maintain a home. It's too big for them. It's too much work. It's too expensive. So and there's different life stages, right? When you're younger, you want something that's smaller that you can maintain easily. When you're older, same sort of deal, right? And right now we have just so much of this housing that's kind of, expecting sort of families, traditional families to live in, and that's not the way our population is right now. So you really have a mismatch between the housing that's available and the types of housing that's available and what the population needs and can afford.
But I will give credit to the question asker, bringing up valid points and identifying what could be considered to be a low-key data gap in the original report, which is very macroeconomic. But when you go out to these town board meetings, or you're talking to planning commissioners, they basically want to know, okay, but what's in it for my community? Why should my community or my town X allow all of this new housing in, even though it may be beneficial to the broader economy? And there isn't a lot of good data on that, but there is some. And Chance Mullen, in both wearing his numerous hats, including as the mayor of Pelham, has addressed specifically this issue, and he has faced people in his community who have asked about this. So he can provide some data and a report specifically on a case study that happened in Pelham. And Chance, with that, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And yes, as Michael said, I do wear many hats. It's been very exciting and humbling to step into the Housing Action Council, taking over for the legendary Rose Noonan, who built an incredible organization and legacy. Today, I'll mostly be wearing my other hat as mayor in the village of Pelham, where I've served since 2019. After joining as a trustee in 2017, I know that I am probably biased, but I love our little village. For those who aren't familiar, the village of Pelham is a small triangle in southern Westchester. So Mount Vernon is to the west, New Rochelle is to the east, and the village of Pelham Manor is to the south. Just past Pelham Manor is New York City. We have a downtown corridor that runs north to south through the village. And then we have a train station that runs east to west right in the middle of that. We're very unique among the other villages in Westchester. We're actually the third most densely populated village in Westchester and the fifth overall most densely populated community. Overall, our population density is higher than White Plains. So when we talk about development in the village, it's important to just say we're landlocked. We don't have large expanses of land where we can put new buildings. So what we're really talking about is redevelopment, since almost every parcel of land in our community already has something on it or did at one point. It's an exciting time in the village of Pelham. Pelham is now on track to expand its housing stock by a little over 8%. During my time. It's our biggest expansion since the 1920s. And sort of to the point that Michael brought out, we did not start out telling the community, hey, listen, we need to we need to help the regional economy and expand our housing stock by 8%. In some ways, new housing was the solution we kind of backed into because of a number of other goals we had, many of which were related to our downtown corridor. Next slide. So these four things have been our primary goals. The first is downtown revitalization. To give you some context, the history of Pelham's downtown goes something like Pelham happened, then we put in zoning, then not a lot happened. The zoning on our books has a number of restrictions on mostly uncontroversial things like density and parking, which effectively prevents property owners from doing anything new with their properties without asking for a zoning change, which, of course, local boards are always reluctant to do. So over time, we've ended up with a sort of broken teeth footprint where you have some really nice properties immediately adjacent to old gas stations, vacant lots, one-story commercial buildings that have been run down. And these are all parcels that our zoning has prevented anyone from ever doing anything better with. So attracting new investment in our downtown, adding foot traffic, revitalizing and reimagining some underutilized parcels throughout that strip, that was our first and most important goal. And we wanted to focus on infill development, transit-oriented, commercial on the ground floor, residential above, and we wanted to target the underperforming parcels. Our second goal was to expand and strengthen our tax base. There's something really important to understand here when it comes to local taxes. I know what politicians say. Every elected official, I'm going to keep your taxes under control. The reality is municipal taxes, school district taxes, all of them are mostly predictable. Over time, they're going to go up by about 2%. It's our share of those taxes as individual taxpayers is determined by the value of our properties, with high value properties paying more and lower value properties paying less. In a village that is 0.8 square miles, like the village of Pelham, every parcel has an outsized impact on what every other parcel is going to pay. So if you live in a home that's rising in value right next to a commercial property that's not rising in value or even going down, your taxes are going to go up, even if your local government is not increasing taxes that much. That has happened to us. To put it in perspective, in 2000, our commercial corridor made up 17% of our overall tax base and paid 24% of our taxes. Almost a quarter of our taxes were being paid by our commercial corridor. Now our commercial base makes up 12% of our tax base and pays only 17% of our taxes, which means our homes are carrying, our single-family homes and two-family homes outside the commercial corridor are carrying about 7% more taxes than they would be if our commercial corridor had simply kept pace with the rising value of our homes. Our third goal, and I'll talk quite a bit about this, was to pair this work with big infrastructure investments. I believe our aging infrastructure in Westchester County is actually the biggest threat that we have to our livelihood here in Westchester. And we certainly were looking at a whole range of things that we were going to be grappling with. Our school district built a new school, has passed a number of large bonds. We need to replace our traffic lights. We needed to reline our sanitary sewers. We have a big flood mitigation project coming. And I'll talk a little bit about our facilities. We're all very old and not compliant, and we wanted to pair that with some private investment. Our fourth priority here is making sure that we're building new housing at a range of price points and sizes, with an emphasis on the things we don't have. As Michael had kind of spoken about, we have a lot of family housing, both family, single-family homes, two-family homes. Personally, I think most families come to Pelham because of the backyards, but we have a lot of family housing. We have it at a range of price points. We've got some neighborhoods that are extraordinarily expensive. We've got others that are more moderate. In our downtown, we have quite a bit of larger apartments that are frankly more affordable than what we consider affordable housing. What we don't have in Pelham are studios and one bedrooms and housing options for folks at different points in their lives, which is why over time, folks have talked about how Pelham is the place where people move here, send their kids to our schools, and then they leave. And oftentimes they're leaving even though they don't want to. They want to stay, but they don't have a lot of options. Next slide. Just briefly, I'll touch on the core actions we took. The first, starting in 2017, we passed something called the Business District Floating Zone. It's a transit-oriented development overlay. In most cases, it allows 1 to 1.5 more floors. It allows smaller units relative to existing zoning, allows fewer parking spaces, and we built it with a sunset clause. So every 5 years, we've renewed it once. At the end of that 5-year time, we have to renew it or let it go. It should be said, just for context here, most of our downtown already allows 4 floors, and then this would allow 5. So it wasn't that extreme. On the density piece, one of the properties that we had approved under our historical zoning, you could build 4 stories and 7 units. Under the BDFZ, you could build 5 stories, but 27 units. So that's how we're getting those smaller units. The second thing we did, the request for proposals that we refer to as Pelham House, which I'll talk quite a bit about. Fair share mitigation law in 2019 was the first law we passed when I came in as mayor. It allows us to assess our infrastructure needs, assuming a full build out of our downtown corridor, and then assign dollar amounts to developers for contributing to that fund. And then finally, the Pelham Local Development Corporation, which we established in 2019. So the big project, next slide, was a $77 million public-private partnership. And this actually started not by thinking about housing, but by thinking about our core facilities that we use. Next slide. What we were looking at was we had an old firehouse that was 100 years old. Turns out firehouses from 100 years ago, they put basements underneath the apparatus floor. So our basement of our firehouse had a series of 2x4s, a whole matrix of 2x4s holding up the floor where our fire trucks were parked. We had a parking deck, parking lot 2, we refer to it. Minimum to renovate it was covered in caution tape and rust. It would take a little over $3 million, about $15,000 a space to renovate it. To build it from scratch, it would actually take about $6 million. Then we've got our village hall. It was an old house, not ADA accessible. Our one bathroom was at the top of a flight of stairs, and it still had the bathtub in it. They had put a piece of plywood on top of the bathtub, which became our sort of makeshift shelf for our various toiletries. And then we had a police station, which was tucked inside the town hall, Town of Pelham Town Hall, which the village rented space for. It wasn't compliant with modern codes, and we knew we were going to need to start addressing some of these things. That would be $17.5 million minimum, and we anticipated it would likely be well over $20 million. So instead of going down that path, we put out an RFP to interested developers to essentially make us a deal. Next slide. And the C-shaped red box on the left, we said, we'll sell you the old firehouse and the parking deck for you to build a mixed-use residential building with some parking on the inside, public parking in addition to parking for your property. But instead of giving us cash, just build us new stuff. Build us a new consolidated municipal center. We went out with the RFP. We spent a full year of different developers coming and proposing ideas. The one that won, this other little rectangle where our municipal center is, had previously been a Capital One bank. It was up for sale, and they said, we'll go and buy it. And then we'll just put your municipal center there. And then right across the street, we'll build our building. Next slide. As you can imagine, a year looking at different things, there was a lot of public feedback. Most of it, what I've tried to encourage folks is think less about what you don't want and more about what you do want. And what we heard from the community, we wanted to get through this time without a lot of long-term debt, especially because we knew flood mitigation, sanitary sewer relining, all of those other infrastructure needs were coming. And we wanted to kind of reserve that tool for those things. We wanted a dedicated site for the municipal center. We had also looked at other plans where it was incorporated into the residential building. We cared about consolidating all of our departments in a building that was LEED Gold and highly energy efficient. We wanted some EV infrastructure so that in the future we'll be able to power our police vehicles. We want those to be EVs in the future. We also wanted some cash. We wanted some fair share fees. We wanted smaller units. So even though their building will have 127 units, only five of them are 3 bedrooms. Half of them are studios and 1 bedrooms. And that sort of served both purposes. On one hand, we know that we're building what we don't have. On the other hand, there were some folks who were just like, hey, that means you're not going to have as big of an impact on our schools. One thing that we really, really wanted was more affordable housing, more senior housing. We even looked at the possibility of doing 2 different buildings. We ended up settling for 5% workforce. We did get quite a bit of public parking inside their building, some investments in traffic and pedestrian safety. And then that final piece, the $12.2 million in new tax payments via the pilot. Remember, this is all coming from a C-shaped piece of land that was not on the tax rolls at all. So during the pilot period, we're going to get quite a bit of tax relief. And the way this all kind of landed, next slide, is this. We sold $6.8 million of land for essentially $20 million upfront in investment in our community and another $12 million in tax payments over the next 20 years. And then when the thing goes fully on the tax rolls in year 21, its assessed value is roughly 1/7 of our entire downtown corridor. So it's sort of a gift that we're also giving to folks 20 years from now when that pilot comes off. Next slide. When we spoke to the community about it, we really did say, listen, we're going to have to do something because of our facilities. And we laid out the options. You're either, the deputy mayor at the time, Pete Pataki, he said, listen, let me make it simple. You want your taxes to go up or you want them to go down? And that's truthfully kind of how it played out. And not surprisingly, folks wanted the Pelham House option. Next slide. So we're in the fun part. I'm actually doing this webinar from our municipal center. We are open. We've been doing lots of tours with the community. Our 4th graders, every year in 4th grade, the kids learn about government. So now they can come to the municipal center. They go through the police station and the firehouse, and they sit in the meeting hall. And it's been a really wonderful experience. And it's fun to have new stuff. We haven't had new facilities in the village of Pelham. So it should also be said, when we cut this ribbon, it was on the 50th anniversary of the village of Pelham being created. We merged the village of Pelham and the village of North Pelham merged on June 1, 1975. So it was a really fun day. And I do want to give a shout out in the bottom right. That's the former mayor, Mike Volpe. He was mayor from 2017 to 2019. Both of us are from different parties, but we worked hand in glove on this. And so he did a lot of great work. Let me just show you a couple of quick slides because I want to show you some data. Let's go to the next one. As I mentioned, there are also other projects happening in our downtown. We've got a relatively smaller 215 Fifth Avenue. It's the only building in our downtown that was actually built under our existing zoning that came in mid-century. And then we also did a subdivision law that triggered 185 Lincoln. It was an old gas station site that we turned into 5 townhomes. 8 Boulevard West was an old site that was right by the bridge, had a Con Ed substation in the middle of it. Now it's got 2 and 3 bedroom units that I will probably never be able to afford, if I'm being totally honest, but it's one of the nicest properties in town. There were 2 properties that we were really excited about that their site plan expired during COVID. And then 139 Fifth Avenue is completed. And what this looks like in terms of taxes, let's go to the next slide. So we did these projections in 2020 when these things were starting to come on. And you'll see we took parcels of land that were paying $147,000, projected post-development to pay $1.7 million. These are just 6 parcels of land. The school taxes were $1.1 million, which we did a comprehensive school impact study, and that came out to about $57,000 a school-age child. There is no single-family homeowner in Pelham that is paying that much in taxes. And it should be said, we went and looked at this last year. The last time we checked, there were no new school-age kids from any of these developments, which means all of the added taxes going to the school district, it's just tax relief for everyone. There's not a corresponding expense on the other side. And the next slide, I ran these numbers just about a month ago to give you a sense of what those 4 parcels that have been built, what's happened. You can see 2015 to 2018, the taxes were essentially steady. Keep in mind, outside of these parcels, taxes were steadily going up, especially for single-family homes. And then you start to redevelop them and you see that growth in the amount of money being paid in. And that corresponds to a reduction for everybody else, relative. So I know that 139 Fifth Avenue, which is that blue, next year, their assessed value, they're still in the process of filling. So they're full, but they come onto the tax rolls over time. And I think next year, their assessed value jumps another 50%. So that'll climb again. So with that, I'll stop. I want to say, before we started this, Michael gave me a hard time, sort of indicated he thought I might talk too long. But I think I did okay, Michael.
Well, we're not done with you yet, Chance. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. Some of them are very good that I want to get to.
Sure.
And I'll kind of tie it together with a couple of lead questions, which is, you have some developments. The tax advantages to these that you have picked for your presentation are, in the realm of 10x plus.
Yes.
But you have presided over lots of different proposals. Is that typical, or have you seen kind of a range? And if there is a range, have you almost universally seen a tax advantage to other community residents in permitting kind of new developments and redevelopments in the community?
There is a range. So there's that smaller mid-market building is not paying quite as high in taxes as, say, 8 Boulevard West, which I think pays something like $16,000 a unit. So you're definitely going to see a range, but it's all beneficial, if that makes sense. Nobody's falling to a point where you're not getting some big number.
Okay. And to kind of back into that from a different angle, you talked about pilots. Those are payments in lieu of taxes. A
Yeah.
lot of people feel that those are just cynical giveaways to developers. And I'm wondering, as you have sat on the other side of the table and negotiated these deals, what your perspective might be on that.
So one of the things that I've heard people say, well, what would their taxes be if you didn't give them a pilot? And I say, well, their taxes would be nothing because the building wouldn't get built. So the way I see it, I view pilots as stabilization. If I had 150 units coming online in a small village like the village of Pelham, I want to give that project a pilot because I want to see them go through that period of time at the beginning of their building. I want that building to be successful, to be full, to stabilize. The worst possible scenario is you don't give somebody a pilot, they go for it anyway, they get to year 2 and their taxes are wildly more than they expected, and now they're struggling. Now you get to year 5 and they deliver certiorari claims to your school district or to your village or to your town, where now you're taking money out of your coffers to pay back taxes because you overassess them. That's what you don't have to deal with when you have a pilot. The pilot locks it in as a commitment for the financial side of the developer, but it also locks it in for us. And it puts us in a position where no matter what, if they do struggle, they pay us our pilot before they, pay off some of their other debt. So I view it as much a guarantee to us that we're going to get the payments we've agreed to, as it is to the lender who gives the loan to the developer that they're going to have stabilized finances.
Okay. So one of the more provocative questions that was presented to us, a question that kind of started with a recitation of international trade policy and then kind of drilled down into the local is, what are the limits to this? How do you know when enough is enough? And this person uses the example that Pelham and New Rochelle are neighbors. There's a lot of development going on in New Rochelle. Why did you have to do this in Pelham as opposed to just kind of advancing these initiatives across the town line? I will point out that New Rochelle is a good example to bring up because they did what's called a comprehensive plan. Noam Bramson, the former mayor of New Rochelle, who's actually on today, can take a lot of credit for doing that. And so that kind of ties to the importance of comprehensive planning, Chance. And also, I mean, the places where you allow this housing to take place are primarily in a more commercial area
Right.
Of Pelham. You might not want to drop this, for example, someplace in the middle of Pelham Heights or something like that. So how did you
Right.
navigate through these issues when you were talking to the developers and the other members of your town board?
Yeah, and I will say this is actually one of the things that frustrates me sometimes um, about agencies outside of Pelham, right? They don't know the realities of what we're looking at. I've had quite a few conversations with the state, especially when they were doing the housing compact. And if the state wants me to get growth in my downtown, let me do it in a way that actually aligns with our comprehensive plan, that got community input, neighborhood input, so that we know that we're getting the benefits that we need to get. There going to come a point when, in the back of my head, I know there are a couple more sites where we would like to have mixed use developments. There's also going to come a point where we do have to stop, simply because we don't have any more land to develop, right? And I think at each chapter, it's important at the local level to figure out what is it that we're actually trying to achieve here, because we don't exist on a spreadsheet. We are, even the village of Pelham, as I mentioned at the very start of it, we are already the third most densely populated village in Westchester. So what's right for us and how to do development in the village of Pelham is going to be wildly different than what's right in Somers or Peekskill or Yonkers or anywhere else. Um, so I, to the point about your question of when do you stop, there are some development projects that we say no to. People come before us, it's awkward. We say, yes, we want development, but this particular thing in this particular area isn't right. I think you just have to know what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then stick to that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
look, Kate's going to jump in because she's nodding, and I know, it's her 19th anniversary, so she's probably not nodding because she's rushing out. She's just chomping at the bit to speak. So, Kate,
no,
why don't you weigh in on this?
I was just gonna say it's the importance of having some sort of leadership from the state. If everyone knew how much housing they were, and we were solving this problem as, in a bigger way, and everyone had a sort of expectation of how much housing they were supposed to build based on access to transit, how much existing housing was in their town, right? How much they built over the years, then, that would make a lot of sense, right? Then it wouldn't be a sort of Pelham versus New Rochelle versus this municipality trying to figure out, if I build it, then, the town over isn't, is going to suffer the consequences or whatever. It's just a much more rational way of addressing it. And that's sort of what RPA has promoted, is the higher level of government to help and assist and help set an expectation that we're all in this together, right? And we all need to solve it together.
Right. So, look, I could point to a number of policies at the state level that we would like to see them be more aggressive on. CEQA reform comes to mind. And at the local level, look, if you ask me, if you could only do one thing, it would be to create a comprehensive plan for your community. And I'm wondering, Kate, if you feel the same way, and Chance, you as well, or if there's just that one takeaway, what would it be?
I mean, that's a good way to start. I also think just educating yourself and your neighbors about these issues and having a dialogue about it, because there's a lot of reasons why we're in the situation we're in today, and it's not just cut and dry. You need to talk to people about it and sort of soften people up and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think a comprehensive plan is the start, but then you also have to understand the realities of of building in your community. Um, Pelham is even with us being supportive of development, it's still a difficult. Set aside the politics, it's a difficult place to build. Your parking is underneath your building for everything because you're building between buildings. It's all infill development, which means the kinds of projects you can get financed in your community, if you're in the village of Pelham, will be wildly different than the kinds of projects you can get financed in a place with less density, where you can put a parking lot behind the building and you can still have a commercial storefront.
Thanks, Chance. And thank you, Kate. And thank you for all of those who have tuned in today. If you want to do more, or you want to learn more about this, or where you can find more information, there are a number of sources. One, you can pop onto Kate's website, Regional Plan Association. She has access to the full report, including a lot of data and information that you did not see today. That report is also available on my website, westchester.org. You can check into the Welcome Home Westchester website. A shout out quickly to Sarah Tavares, who does a lot of work in this area, and also to Kate's staff who put this webinar together. And the final question that I saw in the chat box was, who can we find to give presentations like this to municipal boards? That is something explicitly that the Welcome Home Westchester campaign is working on. So if you feel like there's a municipal board out there that wants to hear a presentation like this, go to the Welcome Home Westchester website or look us up online or on social media, send us a message, and somebody will contact you and reach out, and we will make it happen. With that, thank you, Chance. Happy anniversary, Kate. And everybody else, enjoy your evenings. Thanks for tuning in today. Take care.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Have a great night.